Hello and welcome, our beloved Magar Media family members. I am Biniam Ambachew, and I am your host for Magar Media English program. Today, in our Magars panel, we will be discussing the Ethiopian federal government and the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front (TPLF) negotiation, and we will analyze the Amhara perspective on the negotiation to end the war in Ethiopia. I am honored to have two wonderful guests to join the discussion. Tewodrose Tirfe is the chairman of the Amhara Association of America, also known as AAA, and the president of the Federation of Amharas in North America, also known as FANA. We also have Robel Alemu. He's the communication director of the Amhara Association of America, also known as AAA. We will cover the details regarding Abiy's government and TPLF negotiation, as well as analyze the ramification and impact on Amharas. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us, Vidi.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Please stay with us and join the discussion, and we'll return after a short break. Welcome back, our beloved Magar Media family members. First, on behalf of the Magar Media staff, I would like to extend how honored and thankful we are for you, Tewodrose Tirfe, and Robel Alemu, for accepting our invitation and coming to the show. Thank you to both of you, and welcome. So in today's discussion, we'll be discussing the Amhara's perspective on the negotiation with TPLF, as well as its ramification on Amharas. As we know, the nearly 2-year conflict that erupted in November 2020, when the TPLF attacked the northern command of the Ethiopian Defense Forces, since the eruption of that war, millions have been displaced, thousands have been killed, and it has plunged Tigray, Amhara, and Afar regions into an unprecedented humanitarian disaster and catastrophe never seen in Ethiopian history. We've seen ethnic cleansing and genocide against Amharas in Metakel, as well as in Oromo regions. We recall more than 13,000 Amharas that have been arbitrarily arrested by Abiy's Prosperity Party, including prominent generals and journalists, as well as Amara Fano patriots, which played a fundamental role in turning the tide of the war by defeating TPLF invading forces and dislodging the Oromo Liberation Army. In recent times, we also see the Oromo regional forces preventing Amharas from entering Addis Ababa, as well as arresting Amhara students across Ethiopia, as well as including some of the districts including some Addis Ababa districts into the Oromo region. And so to gauge kind of a general perspective on the war in northern Ethiopia, I wanted to ask both of you, Tewodrose Tirfe as well as Robel. Both of you have been leading and advocating and cooperating with many of the Amhara organizations in the diaspora, as well as with other civic organizations within Ethiopia. I wanted to gauge your overall perspective on the current political upheaval and situation that Ethiopia is currently going through. What are your thoughts on where Ethiopia is currently? And we can start with Tewodrose.
Biniam, the state of Ethiopia is very concerning. Ethiopia finds itself in a very precarious situation, heading towards a failed state. We have an active war that has been going on for nearly 2 years, as you stated earlier. There is almost an economic collapse. unprecedented increase in inflation. There is an active Amhara genocide happening, not just in Oromo region or Benishangul Gumuz region, but also within Amhara region itself. There is a crackdown by Abiy's Prosperity Party against Amharas, where any critical voices, any Amhara critical voices have been rounded up and arrested. We have seen for the first time in many years incursion by Al-Shabaab into Ethiopia. We have also seen where Sudan has invaded parts of Western Ethiopia and has occupied Ethiopian areas. So it's very concerning. In the midst of all this, we have a situation where the negotiations between two political parties, the TPLF and Abiy's Prosperity Party, which is led by the Oromo Prosperity Party, is supposed to begin, but excluding the Amhara people, the largest people that have been affected in this current conflict or in this war. So it is something that is very concerning to Amharas and Ethiopians in general. Amharas have a lot at stake in this negotiation. Our interest to stop the ongoing Amhara genocide. We have an interest to in ensuring that Amharas are secure and prosperous wherever they may live in Ethiopia. We have an interest in finally resolving the Wolkite and Raya identity and border issue. We have an interest in ensuring justice and accountability for the Amhara genocide that has been perpetrated by starting with the TPLF in the 80s and now continuing under the Abiy administration. And so to exclude Amharas from this negotiation would not bring about lasting peace and an end to this war and moving Ethiopia towards, bringing peace towards Ethiopia as a whole and also moving Ethiopia on a path towards democracy. That's why, as AAA, we are actively demanding that Amharas be included in this negotiation, and we have been pushing this effort with the State Department and the United Nations. We met last week with the State Department twice to talk about this issue specifically. 28 Amhara organizations have come together to write a letter to all the envoys that have a stake in this process. And this letter is not just a public letter. This is a letter that is being delivered to those envoys themselves. And we're hoping to have meetings in the near future with these envoys to ensure that Amharas are included in this process.
Thank you so much, Tewodrose. That's a wonderful overview and analysis into providing accountability and some transitional justice for Amharas that are affected by the war in Ethiopia. The question goes to Robel. So we know that to this day, some parts of North Gondar as well as Wollo regions are still under TPLF control, including Wagimra, Raya, Lamata, and Alam areas. And how can we pursue peace negotiations and peace talks when these Amhara regions are still under TPLF control? And regions such as the North Gondar and some parts of Wollo region are still under siege, where basic services such as humanitarian aid as well as healthcare and electricity are not being provided to these individuals. And so, how do you assess the current Abiy administration and TPLF-led negotiation? Is it legitimate? We know the Ethiopian government has designated TPLF as a terrorist organization. And do you see a problem of legitimacy with allowing TPLF to be negotiated at the round table when it's designated as a terrorist organization? So, what are your thoughts on the current negotiation process, Robert?
Thank you, Biniam. Excellent question. So really, I think how we can portray this current situation is that Ethiopia is at a crossroads, and this could be a very important time in history that could chart the path for either a pathway to something that's more promising compared to something that could be totally disastrous. And I believe that this actually parallels with what we saw in the 1990s when the TPLF, along with its partners such as the Oromo Liberation Front, basically excluded Amharas from determining Ethiopia's future, Ethiopia's destiny. And we saw the drafting of a very inflammatory and disastrous constitution that actually is something we believe ushered a period of apartheid and enabled genocide and potentially even enabled the current war. And so the Amhara people, I believe, and AAA believes, and I'm sure the entire Amhara community believes, has an enormous stake in Ethiopia as having been nation builders. But unfortunately, as a result of this really flawed negotiations process that's already been undertaken, we're seeing very concerning signs of the Amhara people being sidelined. And this could be disastrous once again because Amhara people have had a huge stake in this war. They're one of the primary stakeholders. Earlier, you mentioned the humanitarian toll and the atrocities, and really some of the worst atrocities of this war were committed against Amharas. For example, starting from the Maikadra massacre of November 2020, when over 1,500 ethnic Amharas were selectively massacred by the TPLF. And this is just one episode of the wider Amhara genocide, for which we have multiple actors. And this war really, that again intensified in late 2021, we saw many districts within Amhara region occupied by the TPLF, and then as well as the Oromo Liberation Army, which has been one of the prime perpetrators of atrocities and really of the Amhara genocide, not just in Amhara region, but in places like Oromia region, places like Benishangul Gumuz, and elsewhere in the country. So when we come back to this negotiation process, it's extremely important that accountability is made one of the key foundational pillars because this is what deters these perpetrators of atrocities from committing more crimes in the future. And for us as Amharas, one of our primary responsibilities and one of our primary motivations is to put an end to the Amhara genocide. And so when we talk about this in the context of the negotiations, it's important because, for example, you mentioned the occupied areas of the occupied Amhara areas, such as Alamt and Raya and so forth. And these areas, I think, are firstly one of the primary areas where Amhara genocide was perpetrated, as well as the apartheid order. This is one of the first places in the last 3 decades where we saw Amhara people selectively targeted, oppressed, and then cleansed from the land. And we saw demographic engineering and all types of things. And so, as a result of this war, firstly, nobody wanted this war. But one of the after effects of this war was that Amharas were able to liberate some of these territories, especially in the Welkite area. And this was something that was pursued by, very peaceful means and where people were actually rejected. So we had the Welkite committee that tried to do this, and that endeavor was not successful because TPLF has a history of basically sidelining any types of peaceful attempts at making peace. And we're actually seeing this continue even now when we're starting to see military provocations from TPLF and pretexts that are emerging to justify the next phase of war. And so, as Amharas, we've always supported a cessation of hostilities. We've always supported an end to the fighting, an end to the war. And we believe that this peace talks, this negotiations, can be one avenue for achieving that. But this comes with a sort of a little condition because, firstly, these disputed territories of Welkite and Raya, which are rightful Amhara areas, are not up for debate. These cannot be bargaining chips for any type of negotiations, especially between the Prosperity Party and TPLF, because the Prosperity Party, as you know, is really an entity that does not represent the Amhara people. The Amhara people have held several widespread region-wide protests, basically condemning Abiy Ahmed, condemning the Amhara regional government and other actors within the Prosperity government structure for their complicity in the Amhara genocide, but as well as their inability to administer. For example, as you know, one of the primary duties of any government is to ensure the safety of citizens is protected, right? To deliver basic services. And we're not seeing this happen in many parts of the country, where, as Ted mentioned, there's a huge economic crisis, civilians are being targeted, and there's no safety. So what's critical here is to ensure that in this negotiations process, Amhara people are not excluded, and it's not just the Prosperity Party that is trying to basically represent them. We need genuine Amhara representation, and then we need to have our critical interests looked after, especially the land issue, we need a consensus. We need a final resolution on the administration of Walqait and Raya, a recognition of these lands being Amhara lands, ancestral Amhara lands, as well as basic things. For example, the restoration of banking services, telecommunications, electricity to these areas, because this shouldn't be up for debate. These are basic human rights that need to be fulfilled, and so this is where
Yes.
our representation is important.
One of the international resolution that was established was the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, the ICHREE. This was established by the United Nations Human Rights Commission to be able to conduct a thorough, impartial, and credible investigation into the allegations of various violations and abuses of international human rights law, violations in international humanitarian law, as well as international refugee law in Ethiopia, as well as to be able to establish facts and circumstances surrounding the alleged violation and abuses in Ethiopia. I wanted to ask your views on how could this negotiation take place without the established Human Rights Commission conducting a thorough investigation and providing the empirical and validated evidence into the many human rights violations that we see in Ethiopia. Can we, do you believe that this negotiation could still occur without the investigation and report being published? And we can go ahead and start with Robel.
Thank you, Biniam. Another excellent question. And so this Human Rights Commission is really something that I think goes along with AAA's years-long demand of having independent investigations into the Amhara Genocide, which has been communicated by AAA to the U.S. government, international human rights organizations, think tanks, and other sort of interested parties. And so this commission could actually offer the first opportunity to have some of those atrocities recognized. Now, although the mandate of the commission was to investigate these crimes since the start of the conflict in northern Ethiopia, this is something that we're sort of pushing to have expanded. And so one of AAA's activities has been pushing for atrocities committed by the TPLF, committed by the OLA, and other parties to be recognized. And so we know during the occupation of 2021, and even before that, that Amhara people, or rather residents of the Amhara region, have been disproportionately affected by atrocities in the war. Now, whether those atrocities were sort of recognized on an international scale to the same extent as atrocities in other places, that might not be the case. However, this is where our role has been to sort of advocate and to ensure that the crimes committed against Amhara people are acknowledged, that there's investigations, and that the perpetrators of these the perpetrators of these atrocities are held accountable. Because as I mentioned earlier, without accountability, any type of negotiations process is basically undermined. And when I say undermined, really, it's that in this context where there's an effort to exclude Amharas from being represented, imagine Prosperity Party, TPLF, two basically entities that have been accused of complicity or of committing these crimes in talks with other Amhara people, then you have a situation where it's very easy to for them to escape accountability through some type of agreement, some type of collusion. And so this is something where there's a historic opportunity, once again, a historic opportunity to ensure that the Amhara interests are looked after. And if this
Yeah.
opportunity is not taken advantage of, then it could be disastrous because, as we know, from the beginning of the conflict, there's just been this narrative that Tigray, for example, was victimized, that all of these things happened, and for us as Amharas, it basically reflects a lack of our perspective of things from our eyes, because Amhara people never wanted war. There was already a huge crisis before the war of these targeted genocidal massacres and this Amhara genocide, which victimized Amharas outside of the war, prior to the war, both
Yes.
timeline-wise and geographically. As I said earlier, in the Oromia region, in places like Wallagga, in places like the Benishangul Gumuz region, Matakel. And so it's very important that peace talks take this into consideration. However, with that being said, we're now seeing the risk of a re-intensification of war. of TPLF wanting to wage war on especially the people in Welgait, but as well as other frontiers with Eritrea, with Afar, with other borders, for example, the Ethiopia-Sudan border. And so this actually threatens to jeopardize this process even further. So from our perspective, really, it's very important that this process, this Human Rights Commission process, takes into account what's been happening to Amharas, but we could see this
Mhm.
process become very complicated further than it already has been. Thank you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Biniam, if I
Thank
can
you,
just
Robel.
add very um,
Please, go ahead. Yeah.
just touch on a few points. As Robel mentioned, an independent investigation, international independent investigation, is something AAA has been demanding for several years. And we have met with the ICHREE. We have met with them several times, provided them our reports and a lot of information to facilitate and assist in their investigation on war crimes and human rights violations committed against Amaras since the start of this war. So we're very supportive of this investigation. The ICHREE is set to deliver their findings in mid-September, and they will to the UN Human Rights Council, and they will be seeking a renewal of that mandate. So the investigation and also the independent investigation and the negotiation can occur in parallel. But one of the things that we have demanded in the letter, and I'm not talking just about AAA, these are 28 Amara organizations globally. In the letter to the special envoys is the inclusion of civil society in the negotiations. Including civil society is critical to ensuring justice and accountability for the victims in this war. But if the only thing that you include in this negotiation are the perpetrators of the war crimes, then how can you ensure justice and accountability? So it doesn't make any sense, and that's why we are expressing our concerns to the special envoys that if the true intent of this negotiation is long-lasting peace and ensuring justice and accountability, Amaras must be included, and civil society members must also be included to ensure justice and accountability, and that all perpetrators are held accountable. And one of the things that we're asking is for the Amhara community globally to advocate for the renewal of this mandate, because it's critical that the ICHREE continues to investigate Amhara genocide. The evidence is there. We're supporting and helping in this investigation, and we want the recognition of Amhara genocide.
Thank you for that clarification, Tewodrose. You did mention the 28 Amara civic organizations that submitted the letter. This was a letter submitted on August 18, 2022, and the title of that letter, as you alluded to, is called "The Exclusion of Amharas from Peace Negotiation Process Will Not Bring Lasting Peace in Northern Ethiopia." And this letter was sent to the United States as well as European Union Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa representatives, as well as other African Union and United Nations elected officials, as well as the AAA, the Amhara Association of America, which you chairman, Mr. Tewodrose. On July 1st, it released a statement claiming that Abiy lacks the credibility and legitimacy to negotiate on behalf of Amaras. What do you believe is the purpose and the central message of this letter that was submitted on August 18? And if you can also briefly discuss the list of those 28 organizations that co-signed the letter and their participation in writing the letter, as well as you briefly touched upon this in the previous comment you made, but the role that civic organizations as well as nonprofit or Amhara oppositional parties can play and any other stakeholders in this conflict. What is their role to play in this peace negotiation, and how can we make sure that these organizations are invited to promote inclusivity and make sure that, as you both are aware of, in 1991, when TPLF and the Oromo Liberation Army was negotiated, in designing the Ethiopian constitution, Amharas were excluded. So to make sure to avoid the 1991 dilemma, how can we make sure that Amharas are included in this negotiation?
Thank you, Biniam. Once again, a great question. It's really important that you mentioned that AAA actually had an earlier statement addressing the same topic of negotiations on July 1st. And so this new letter from basically a conglomerate of Amhara organizations worldwide is reiterating some of the same points, but also I think just kind of has a different message to it as well, because really throughout this process, we've seen the Ethiopian government's basically inability to be reliable, especially from going from a standpoint of saying they would not negotiate with the TPLF to now saying they would negotiate with the TPLF. But what's also concerning for the Amhara community was that one of the key pillars of this negotiation was the basically administration of the areas of Welkait and Raya, which Amharas believe was occupied illegally and annexed by the TPLF, including actually before the inauguration of the Constitution of 1995. And so any attempts to frame this as something that was wrongful or that is due to the TPLF is both morally wrong, but also could jeopardize the lives of the inhabitants in those areas. Because, as I mentioned before, even as recently as November 2020, we saw that one of the worst, or the worst, the single worst atrocity of the war, the Maikadra massacre of 1,500 Amhara civilians at the hands of the TPLF. And so we can imagine the horrors of this territory falling under their control once again, and what could follow, and which really could be multiple Maikadra scale attacks. And so going back to this letter, we have 28 organizations from all over North America, Europe, Australia, even in Ethiopia, that have actually come together to say collectively, we, the Amhara community, international community, are united on this issue, and that this is something that we're not going to ignore like we did in the past. There's a whole bunch of reasons for why all of that happened in the past, but really at this time when Amharas are conscious of the issues in Ethiopia, there's no way that they can remain silent when this critical process seeks to exclude them. And so going back to this letter, really the key points were just firstly fulfilling the basic necessities of the people outside of negotiations. For example, for TPLF, if they want to negotiate, really, firstly there has to be a complete withdrawal of the TPLF forces from occupied areas of Talemt and of Raya and of Wag, and that needs to happen immediately, because you can't occupy this territory and then try and force negotiations. And we know that TPLF has a history of not basically abiding by these types of agreements. And we know that for them, especially from the start of this war, there's been a strategic shift between saying, oh, we're going to negotiate, and then going back to, no, we're going to wage war because, we have to fulfill our agenda. And so for Amharas, there can be no trust from the TPLF side, no trust with the prosperity side or with the Abiy side. And so Amhara's interests must be looked after. The telecommunications, banking services, and so on need to be delivered to places like Welkait, because the people have been in the dark for a very long time. This should not be something that's debatable. It should be fulfilled immediately. But also, just reiterating that there's a red line when it comes to these lands, but there's also it's very important that both the TPLF and Prosperity Party do their fair share to address these points I made, but also for the international community to exert due pressure if the objective is really to bring peace, lasting peace and stability to Ethiopia, because the exclusion of the Amharas, which by our estimate is actually demographically the most significant group in Ethiopia, is simply irrational. It doesn't make sense. And I think any type of foreign policy that seeks to sideline Amharas is misguided. And so this is an attempt to kind of reiterate that in very clear terms. Also, earlier you mentioned the case of the mass crackdown of over 13,000 Amhara political prisoners, including journalists, military officers, activists, some people just plain ethnically profiled, and as well as the Fano veterans. And so all of these people have been targeted in such great numbers by the Abiy regime, which has sought to rob Amharas of any type of vocal voice. And as we saw from the course of the war, the government itself was unable to protect the Amhara people from this genocidal invasion by the TPLF and the OLA. And it was actually the
Mhm.
Fano, the people themselves, who self organized and defended themselves. And so the government wasn't there to protect the people in ensuring that the Amhara region was liberated. This was done predominantly by the force of the people, by the civic organizations, by the opposition political parties. And therefore, it's only fair that these same actors, these organized entities, are present to negotiate on behalf of Amharas. The Prosperity Party could not possibly represent Amharas. And so I don't know, Ted, if you have anything to add there, but that's really what I want to say.
The civil
Mhm.
society groups have been the main actors who have been bringing awareness of the ongoing Amara genocide in Ethiopia to the international community. They have been the main groups demanding accountability and justice. Civil society groups have been the main actors in demanding that Amaras be included in the negotiations, that also civil society be included in the negotiations. And the reason being is because the Amara community does not believe that Abiy Ahmed's regime has the mandate, the support, or standing to negotiate on behalf of Amaras, especially when Amaras are demanding for his resignation and also an independent investigation into the role of his administration in the ongoing genocide against Amaras. No observer of Ethiopia would believe that Abiy has legitimacy to represent Amaras in this negotiation.
Thank you so much, Tewodrose. In this negotiation and peace talks that we have covered so far, I wanted to get to the core of the agenda. Um, what are some of the guiding principles for the negotiation? What are some specific agendas that should be on the negotiation table? What are some preconditions or non-negotiable demands that Amharas have in this peace process? How can we make sure political questions such as, for instance, ensuring the idea of transparency and impunity? How can we ensure victim groups as the primary agenda through these negotiations? For the family members, as Robel and Tewodrose have you discussed thus far, for those who have lost their loved ones in Baikadra, in China, and the Galikoma massacre in Afar is one of the highlights of the war. So, how can we include these family members in this negotiation process? How can we include the testimonies of women and children who were raped or gang raped and internally displaced individuals? How can we ensure their views and interests are reflected in the outcome of these talks?
Well, Biniam, and I think that's why we are demanding for Amaras to be included in this negotiation process, right? It is that the delegation that Amaras would put together, and it would be a consortium of opposition political parties and civic organizations that would bring these issues to the negotiation table, right? But for example, things that are non-negotiable for us is that the TPLF must leave the areas within Amara region that they are currently occupying. And secondly, the issues of Wolkait and Raya are non-negotiable. These are red lines for Amaras. Amaras who have lived in these indigenous Amara lands that were forcefully annexed by TPLF have suffered ethnic cleansing and genocide for nearly 30 years. It is unacceptable for Amaras to think that these people and these lands would go back under the TPLF rule and administration again, and for allow for more crimes to be committed against Amaras. But there are several issues that that Amaras are concerned about, as I said earlier, and Robel touched up on it. That is the issue of justice and accountability, and that's why we are demanding that civil society organizations be included in the process. Also, the issue of this ethnic apartheid constitution is an critical issue for Amaras, and that is also an issue an agenda that we would like to bring up to the negotiation process as well. So and just of the overall state of the country, we want Ethiopia to become a prosperous democratic country. And what we are seeing right now is Abiy is an authoritarian regime. We do not have strong institutions in Ethiopia. What Abiy says is what is implemented in the country. And this is very dangerous. And so all these issues are, and along with other issues, but these are the primary issues that I've listed, is what we want to bring, to the negotiations and discuss with all those people that would be there.
Thank you so much, Tewodrose. Recently, on August 17th, 2022, there was a statement issued by the TPLF's military command, the TPLF External Office, saying that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces have bombarded the debit with heavy artillery. However, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces refuse and refute the statement. But again, this goes to show you that it's sending mixed signals. Despite the humanitarian and overall security improvement in Tigray region, TPLF continues sending mixed signals and making further precondition for talks. And other doubt that TPLF's sincerity and commitment for genuine peace talks, and are concerned that the group is actually buying more time and preparing for another round of military adventure. What does the statement made by the TPLF External Office mean to the peace negotiation moving forward?
I think we all know that, as Ethiopians, that that TPLF would never, was not really intending to negotiate in good faith, and they make these allegations as a way to win, some of the to make gains in the negotiation, right before the negotiations start, and this is something that this is a tactic that Ethiopians are well aware of since the TPLF came into power in the early 1990s. But I think if we have to be frank and honest, neither party, neither the TPLF or the Abiy administration are really interested in peace. If both of these groups were interested in peace, this is not the path that they would follow. The Abiy administration and the TPLF, they're not really that different from each other. What this is for those two, this is a fight over power. It's not a fight over ideology. The TPLF implemented this ethnic apartheid system to establish Tigray hegemony, and Abiy is using the same ethnic apartheid system to create Oromo hegemony. And that's really what it is. And that's why, if we want long-lasting peace, what we need is a more inclusive negotiation process that includes Amaras and the other belligerents, including civil society organizations. And this is a way to ensure that all the issues are on the table, all the issues can be, properly resolved, leading, and to move the country towards a democratic process or democratic path.
Thank you so much, Tewodrose. Rebel, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Biniam and Ted. Just to add a little bit, basically, this is TPLF being TPLF. When they feel that they can wage an attack and take what they want by force, they'll do so. If they're not able to do that, they'll resort back to peace talks and this type of rhetoric. So this is a part of a trend that we've seen, especially in the last 2 years, at several points. And unfortunately, this is not going to help the people of Amhara, of Afar, of Tigray, but this is going to help the TPLF leadership, because at the end of the day, as Ted said, this is a war for power. They're ultimately motivated by power, about returning to central power, about reclaiming, Welkite, re-annexing it and resubjugating the people. And so for them, this avenue of scoring diplomatic points, or giving the impression that they're after peace but they're being forced to go to war, is something that they may perceive as advantageous. But I think time basically is showing who's consistent, what is not consistent. And I think it's clear to any sort of objective international observer now that TPLF is not after peace. We saw throughout 2021 how they basically ransacked Amhara and Afar regions, with top TPLF officials saying that they were going to settle a score. So score settling and things like weaponized sexual violence, genocidal massacres. These are not things that you would find from a group that is looking for peace. This is something from a warmongering group that is after something else. It's trying to impose or strike fear, instill fear into other communities. And so it's very important that the international community pressures the TPLF not to engage in this war. But as we've seen, at the same time, this will not be a successful endeavor for the TPLF, because it's just going to result in more fighting, and it's something where they just don't have the capacity really to return to central power. They were pressured out of central power in the first place by majority protests from the largest groups in the country, and so there's no place for TPLF to reclaim central power, and any ambitions of re-annexing land will not be successful as well, because the people have vowed not to allow that to happen again. The wounds of the 27 years of darkness under TPLF are still very fresh, and people are not willing to return to that period of apartheid, of genocide, and all of these things. And so
Mhm.
we hope that peace talks will be successful, but at the same time, there can be no trust in TPLF wanting peace. And of
Absolutely.
course, just
Thank you
and
so
of course,
much.
when I say that, sorry, just add one more thing, and just to add,
Please, yeah.
the Abiy government itself also does not want peace. It wants a prolonged conflict. We've seen at major junctures that there was efforts to prolong the fighting, to prolong the war for their own political ambitions as well. Because for the Abiy government, it was never about fighting TPLF to protect the Amhara region or to protect Afar. In fact, we saw rhetoric of the war being over, despite many lands still being occupied by TPLF. And so for the Abiy government, it's not about making peace. It's just about, as long as their interests are not hurt, there's no
Mhm.
really other stake or interest otherwise. There's no shared interest of looking after the Amhara people, the Afar people, or anyone else.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robel. We are wrapping up and finishing the program. I wanted to give you an opportunity to, clarify any statements that you made, any closing remarks that you have, but also speak to the fact that, I understand that we submitted a joint letter with 28 Amara organizations representing the civic organizations. But what can Amharas do generally, uh, in diaspora as well as domestically in Ethiopia, to really be part of this negotiation process? Even if the negotiation process fails, what are steps that Amharas, guideline principles we should do to be able to make sure that Amhara's interests are met in today's Ethiopia political spectrum?
Um, Thank you, Biniam, for another good question and for this opportunity just to give some closing remarks. Um, One clarification maybe was, as we talk about Webguide, we're talking about all of those areas. It's not just Webguide, it's Webguide, Agadet, Alamt, Humera, and then the Raya, Wag, all of those. And when we talk about this, we're saying that this is one of the primary areas of Amhara genocide, where we saw some of the worst parts of TPLF's cruelty. This has been documented by international journalists. This has been documented now by research from Gondar University. We've, as AAA, also released a human rights investigative report on the Maikadra massacre. And so it's up to our people at the end of the day to use those tools to advocate, but also to push for accountability. So we talked about the Human Rights Commission earlier, about the opportunity there, and really also for that to inspire people to even pursue alternative means. So there could be other opportunities in the future that open up. And ultimately we need to be able to inform our people so they're aware of what's been happening. We have an enormous Amhara population both in Ethiopia and also in the international diaspora. This statement from 28 Amhara organizations highlighted how organized Amhara people have become in such a short time frame compared to other groups. Because, as you know, historically, Amhara people were not predisposed to organizing by ethnicity. It was more about being Ethiopian first in the past. But this is changing, and it's not to say that we're throwing away our Ethiopian heritage. It's just to say that we have this ethnic identity that's important to acknowledge because this is basically a criteria for the oppression of our people, the targeting of our people, um, and so anybody now can take that and using those tools can advocate on behalf of the Amhara people by contacting their local representatives, by supporting organizations like AAA that are doing important work. To learn more about AAA's activities, you can visit AAA's website at www.amharaamerica.org. And then, donations support a lot of AAA's work, whether it's the independent investigations on the ground, as well as scaling up efforts and, doing more to advocate for the Amhara people, ensure the representation of the Amhara people, and ultimately bring accountability for the decades-long Amhara genocide. And I think the recent global campaign of the I Am Fine No movement, the candlelight vigils, the protests and rallies, and even their counterparts in Ethiopia highlight that the Amhara people are more united than ever, and this is promising. This shows that in the future there's going to be more room for growth because our potential still has not been tapped into. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and the more we can organize, the more that we can advocate, the stronger that we can become, and the more that we can ensure, the more easily we can ensure the well-being and safety of our people.
Thank you so much, Robel. Ted, you want to add?
Yeah, in addition to what Robel mentioned, what Amara people can do at this moment is one, join Amara organizations. In order for us to overcome this, we need to work together. We need to be united. Now, as you saw, 28 in this letter, 28 Amara organizations across the globe, from the United States, Canada, Europe, New Zealand, Australia, and Ethiopia came together and delivered a letter to these special envoys from Special Envoy Hammer, Weber from the EU, the UK, Obasanjo, and as well as the Special Envoy from China. And we're making sure that these letters are delivered to them. As Amaras here in the diaspora, you can make sure that these letters are also delivered to your members of Congress. You can also ensure that these letters are also delivered to your members of parliament if you live in Europe or Canada, so that they understand Amara's perspective, so that they understand that this negotiation process is not going to lead to lasting peace, but instead is going to lead into further conflict when you exclude Amaras, when you exclude civil society from this negotiation process, and that this negotiation process is not seeking to ensure justice and accountability when you're bringing together the two main perpetrators of genocide that's been committed against Amaras. So please be vigilant, be active, and then also what we can ask Amaras across the diaspora, especially, is to contact think tanks, contact academic institutions that you're affiliated with, and educate them. Contact journalists and in Western media to make sure that our issues are out there. Contact the international organizations like the United Nations. As I said earlier, we met with the State Department. We're going to continue our engagement with them. We're the African Union to have a meeting with Obasanjo to discuss this matter. So Amara organizations are at the forefront of engaging with all the stakeholders in this negotiation process. Those in the Amaras who are in the broader diaspora community support these Amara organizations that are doing this, not just by joining, but also even financially contributing these organizations. That's really all that can be done. And if we do this, there's no reason why we cannot be part of this process and ensure that our issues are going to be brought forward by genuine Amara delegation.
Thank you so much, Tewodrose. I couldn't agree more. We definitely need a strong, vibrant Amhara participation in these dialogues as well as negotiation. We have a lot of Amharas in America as well as in Europe, and we've seen the movements in the I Am Fando movement, as Robel suggested, in the various protests that have been in every part of the city. So we have the personal, we have the movement. We need to keep pushing, keep mobilizing, and keep advocating for our people. Wanted the media personal, I would like to extend how thankful and honored that we are to have you both. Tewodrose Tirfe, again, is the chairman of the Amhara Association of America, AAA, and also the president of the Federation of Amharas in North America, or also known as FANA. And Robel Alemu is the communication director of the AAA, the Amhara Association of America. Thank you both for joining the discussion and giving us an overview of the peace negotiation.
Thank you for having us, Biniam. It was a
Thank you
pleasure.
for having
Thank you
us,
so
Biniam.
much. Absolutely. And thank you to our beloved Magar Media family members for watching and staying tuned. You can watch today's show again by visiting Magar Media webpage at magarmedia.com and our YouTube channel at the Magar Media YouTube channel. And until we meet again, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.